where are we at right now from who you speak to and what you know compared to last year? Are we improving? Are we at the same place? And what do you see changing over the next 12 months from an investment for startups?
One of my favourite sayings is you'll do far less in 12 months than you hoped, but you'll achieve far more in 5 years than you ever dreamt. And I think you have to think about timeframes. If I think about 2017, when Amplify was out raising, and I think about the landscape today, so much better. Founders are much better educated. The networks are more open, more transparent. It's less of a skullduggery kind of like thing than it was, which is brilliant because that's what's needed. I think today we're in a relatively okay space. If the company has founders who've got good experience and there's revenue in the company, it's not too difficult to go raise. I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not easy, but it's achievable.
Hello, I'm Kieran O'Connor, and this is episode 4 of the Calculated Risks podcast. Today, we're joined by Cai Gwinnutt. Cai is the founder of Woodstreet Research and also the co-founder of Open Moove. Cai's been involved in the South Wales tech ecosystem for many years. He's worked at a variety of companies, and more recently has been working with early-stage startups on strategy and investment. Hello, Cai.
Hey, Kieran, how are you?
I'm very good today, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for joining me. I don't know if I gave you a copy of this before, but here's a copy of my book. I didn't.
Fantastic.
That's my go-to for every episode, so I can collect some dust somewhere, I'm sure.
Are we going to do the audiobook today?
Yes. Yeah, you're involved. Yeah. Thanks for making the time to come on. I start the podcast the same way every time, and it's to do with risk-taking, tolerance to risk, and any risk you've taken over your career. So the first question is, thinking back to all your years in the tech industry, was there any big risks that you took which seemed monumental at the time? Maybe a new job, a step in a different direction, and in hindsight, weren't as big as you thought. And how were you feeling at that time?
That's a great question. I think it's very subjective as well, and hindsight is a great leveler in terms of risk. As you were asking the question, at a time I took a risk and it definitely didn't work out. This is probably about 18 years ago or something. I was working late one night and I won't name the company, and we were doing some database migrations. And I thought, if I just do it this way, I'll be able to leave in like the next half an hour because it'll all be done. And a couple of hours later, I was still there. It'd all gone catastrophically wrong. And we had to revert everything. So, I guess those kind of risks, perhaps you learn very quickly not to take. But in terms of career, I'm a fan of you just need to jump to back yourself and to trust that something somewhere will catch you on the way down. It might be a little bit like falling out of a tree and hitting a couple of branches and getting a few bruises, but at the end of the day, they make stories and they make things worthwhile.
So that might lead on to the second question then about taking the jump. What's your risk tolerance level like now? And I'm asking that from a perspective of you've just launched Open Moove, co-founder of Ross McKenzie. How much of a risk was that? And would you have done that 10 years ago?
I would have done it 10 years ago. Maybe. Today, it certainly wasn't a huge risk. And you've obviously had Ross on the podcast. When we were introduced through you. When we first met, you very quickly just get a feeling for this guy's the right side of crazy. Like, he's ambitious, he wants to disrupt things, but also he's not, a complete nutter.
That always helps, yeah.
And so, getting into business with somebody like that is not a huge risk at this stage of my career, I guess. The risk becomes slightly when you start speaking to clients and you start trying to sell the product. And that's been an interesting and fun journey, but something we're all, we're enjoying. And I think also you learn to enjoy the risk, right? Which is maybe healthy.
I think so. Yeah. I certainly enjoyed the risk taking that. And, looking back, and often it wasn't as big as I first thought, like starting something, doing something, you look back and it's paid off. So unless you're doing your database work late at night, don't take any
Don't do
shortcuts. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I know your background, but for anyone watching, give us some highlights of your technology career in terms of like, maybe companies you worked at or real projects that made a movement.
Yeah, I've been really lucky. Sort of straight out of uni, I went and interviewed initially with a couple of defense contractors, and very quickly realized that that wasn't particularly what I wanted to do in my life, both in slightly in terms of like the ethics of it maybe, but also just a case of I didn't want to work in those big organizations with lots of structure. I wanted something a bit more agile, a little bit more fast paced. So I went and worked for a little insurance intermediary out in Penarth, where I just got amazing support, like from day one, and freedom to mess up the database, but also freedom to try things. And when I sort of, maybe like a year into that, I was ready to try and do something different. They again became my first customer. I went out contracting at that point, and were brilliant. Moved through some other roles, spent a bit of time working in medical education, and that company was acquired by the British Medical Journal. And that was a brilliant place to work. Just you felt every day you got up and you were doing good, honest work, making lives better, making doctors better or helping doctors to be better at their jobs. And then after a little gap, which maybe we'll talk about later, but ended up at Wales's first sort of proper attempt to become a unicorn, Amplify. And that was my first experience of real VC-backed company, trying to just go as quickly as you could. That went great for 2 years, 3 years. And then it just wasn't going to be the unicorn that it needed to be. We were a bit too early to market, and capital in Wales or the UK is just not quite there to achieve an open AI-like success story. After that, I moved on to Tramshed Tech, and worked with the guys at Tramshed to build out their incubation and sort of programs. Incredibly proud of all of that work and the companies we supported. And I think that coincided with a time where Wales was trying to get a proper footing on the world stage, in terms of being a home for startups and an incubator for young companies. Last year, around about this time, left Tramshed in order to set up my own consultancy, Woodstreet. And as you mentioned at the start, we work with early stage companies around their strategy and raising venture and all of those sort of good and fun bits. And then accidentally sort of founded Open Moove with Ross in, when was it, like October last year. And that's slowly taken more and more of my life, which is great.
It's a cool journey. I want to jump back to Amplify because that stuck out for me as, the first big VC-backed experience you had. What? Give me an idea of how that was and like any lessons you've taken away from working for a company that tried to make unicorn status.
Yeah, Amplify was sort of all encompassing at the time. It was a ride. The thing that I think back to a lot was recruitment. We were trying to build a company culture and also recruit a lot of people at the same time. And that's really hard to do. And I remember, I'm sure you'll sort of empathize with this. I remember I'd phone the recruiter at the end of the week and say, okay, so I've interviewed like 10 people this week or sometimes more. I want to hire this one, and I'd give them a name. And then I'd say, I really like this trait, this trait, this trait. And the recruiter would say back to me, Kai, that's 3 different people. You've mixed them up. And I learned how to take notes a lot better during meetings. I mean, we hired really, really good people into that company. But recruitment is really stressful, really hard work, and especially when you're trying to make a snap judgment on somebody and bring them in. And then once you've brought them in, you have to get them up to speed with everything you're doing. And invariably in an early stage startup, most of what you're doing is making loads and loads of mistakes, and changing everything every couple of months. So yeah, that that was just a very quick way of learning around that stuff.
Yeah, I could be here for a long time talking about the culture, the recruitment into a startup, but that's a whole other subject. But I am interested in, after you left Amplify, was that when you kind of had a spark or found your interest for the uncertainty of smaller companies and that side of things, rather than an insurance company like you worked at previously?
It's certainly when I decided there needs to be more startups happening, not just in Wales, across the UK. And there needs to be more support for those startups. And I don't just mean in terms of investment. I mean in terms of the ecosystem supporting founders, bringing them together, creating those groups. And that was very much the initial conversations that I had with Tramshed around, it'd be really cool if we built this. And that it's not a solo activity. You don't get a great startup that just springs up in the middle of a whole bunch of other medium-sized companies. I think I've always tended towards smaller companies. So the insurance company I mentioned at the start, we were like 80 people at peak. On exam was, I don't think there was ever more than 15 of us or something. I love those small teams where you can have a big impact, but also you can speak to everybody over lunch on a Friday. You can move quickly in those companies, and that's much more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on something there, which I was going to save to a bit later, but it feels right to go on to that now, around investment. And I mean, you've had a lot of conversations around investment, some of the challenges here in South Wales, and also the differences between the UK and the US.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's difficult for some of the smaller stage companies? We've got some great ones here in South Wales. Why do you think it's difficult for those companies to attract VC investment, angel investment, in comparison to maybe like London?
Yeah, I think a huge part of it is around risk. There's a lack of, so just to play the other side a second, there's a lack of founder education around what VC actually means and looks like, and how investors think about a deal. And I think it's really important that we spend more time educating or helping founders understand what that looks like, why that's a thing. The UK market and the American market are very, very different. And, so you have these sort of power law kind of funds in the US where they're going to make 30 investments and they only really need one or two of those to work out in order to return the fund and make their returns. Whereas the UK tends to be somewhat more conservative, like small c conservative. I think part of the problem historically with Wales is, Silicon Roundabout, when that was a thing, well, if you were an ambitious startup, you moved to London, you moved to Shoreditch, and you grew it there. And so why would you go outside of Shoreditch if you were looking for a startup? COVID and, the lockdowns kind of helped, I think, with that situation in terms of they allowed startups to spring up more so all over the place. And then you had ecosystems like in Bristol with engine sheds and the teams there sort of slowly growing startups. There's some really great stuff up in Edinburgh and then parts of the north with Northern Powerhouse. And so slowly more and more funds were looking outside of London and realising actually you can get more for your money. There
is a world outside of London.
Yeah. There's a good deal to be made. We've got to be really careful about not sort of underplaying ourselves and doing too cheap of a deal. But that is slowly coming. Another great thing about Wales, back into my Tramshed days of here's great things about Wales, but it's really quick to get to London and it's pretty easy. I love that train. It's probably like the quietest 2 hours of my week when I can just sit and just work.
Well, the Wi-Fi is terrible.
Oh, the Wi-Fi
is terrible. Yeah, I don't know how you get any work done.
You just have to do it all offline. I'm old school.
Yeah. Nice.
But yeah, no, you're right. You can get your sort of stuff done on the way to London and stuff. And investors are inclined to come down. And also the other big thing that happened during COVID was that people would actually listen to pitches online. And there's still a degree of that. The ways to de-risk this for founders, I guess, is get involved in that local ecosystem, get to know people, build trust, and then you'll get introductions made as well.
Got an interesting question, but I'm just going to take my jacket off.
Okay, I'm going to take a sip of this as well. What's that going to do for continuity?
I know. I know. We'll have to make it work. AI. You mentioned there that founders need to, or would be better off understanding what VCs look for in a deal. I imagine this is what some of what Woodstreet Research does. So without giving too much away, I'm sure there'll be some founders watching this.
Yeah.
Name a couple of things that they can do to make themselves more attractive to a VC firm.
So frustratingly, I guess the easiest thing you can do to make yourself more attractive is to have revenue, have customers, have a viable business. And that's much easier said than done. The founders themselves are really important. So if you're straight out of university and you have very little working experience, then it's going to be a lot harder to raise capital. For better or for worse, but that's the reality. Whereas that if you've been through a couple of startups, you have some sort of founding experience, it'll be a lot easier. Also, your network's just going to be bigger to begin with. So that de-risks things. IP is a bit of a weird one, especially in software. We don't talk about it a lot, but something, again, that an investor can sort of fall back on and have a little bit of confidence around, there's some tangible assets within of this business that are potentially worth something. Just provides them with that cushion that they need. And then there's that balance around being ambitious, but not being ridiculous. So with Open Moove at the moment, we're quite honest that our goal for Open Moove is in the same way that when you start looking to buy a house, you probably open up Rightmove. When you look to start selling your house, we want you to open up Open Moove. And we'd very much like every single transaction in the UK to go through the platform in 3-4 years' time. But there's a very, very viable business years 1 to 3 in us not achieving 100% market coverage. So that's the nice to have, the cherry on the cake. Let's build a viable business and let's base the valuation today around that viable business and be realistic.
Okay, before we go into Open Moove then, because I got lots to talk about on that, what about Woodstreet Research? Tell the people listening and give me an idea of, what is it here to do? What problems does it solve? And who are you ideally working with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's very much a vehicle for me to do my consulting work through. So the question is more, what do I enjoy doing, I guess? And I've played with this over the last year, and I don't think we're gonna build a particularly big team or much of a team around Woodstreet. The ideal sort of customer are some second-time founders, preferably who have experience somewhere else in another industry, who've realized there's an opportunity to build some technology within of their industry to solve some big problems. And so if we can get in with them early days, that's brilliant. Start to strategize, think about go-to-market and the kind of customers and what a real minimum viable product would look like.
So a company that's pre-revenue?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm not at all sort of bothered about that stage of it. It's understanding how we can get into market, and then with MVP, again, people spend an awful lot of money building MVPs, whereas in reality, your most basic MVP is a waiting list, right? It doesn't need to be anything more complicated than that. Or it's a button to do something in a product that already does everything else. How can we get that into the market? How can we launch it? How can we build it up? How can we get some traction around it? And then there's, the question then around how do we fund those things? And there's various levels of support available across the UK and in Wales, and it's signposting to those and opening some doors, and whether it's getting universities involved where necessary. So it's all the good fun bits. But it's very much a working with quality rather than just doing quantity. There is definitely a need in the world for the quantity as well. And putting people into big cohorts and kind of taking them through that as a cohort and letting the good ones rise to the top.
Yeah. But as you said, Open Moove is taking more and more of your time, which is a good thing, I'm sure. So I'd like to understand your perspective on the you and Ross situation, right? You're a technical co-founder. Yeah. Ross is the non-technical. I work with many startups. You'll know some of them.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to see the blend, right? Of, are they all technical? Are none of them technical, which is probably not the best route? Or is it a split, right? Is it two who one is, one isn't? So how has it worked so far for you and Ross? You being very technical and Ross not being technical?
Awful, no. So I think, when we were first introduced, I was certainly thinking of that through the lens of Woodstreet more generally. Ross has obviously built an estate agency himself called Alexander, and that's a successful business that, and an absolutely lovely team of people as well. We very quickly kind of gelled, and you have to get these gut instincts about people, right? And then you have to trust your gut that it's going to work. And so the conversation flipped quite quickly from, oh, maybe we can do some work together and like we can build you an MVP, to I kind of want to be part of this because it sounds interesting and it's a really big problem. The relationship's really good. He's very coachable. I know you played a bit of rugby together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if he was coachable when you were playing rugby, but it's, and I try and be the same. So there's a whole learning curve for me as well in terms of understanding estate agency and conveyancing and all of that. But it's been like a super positive like relationship and a really productive relationship for the last 6 months. We're at a point where there are customers there are people moving house using Open Moove, which is it feels like a real privilege that you're part of that journey for people. And yeah, the waiting list grows every day of conveyancers and estate agents who are wanting to join.
Good, well done.
Thank you.
Customers using the product already.
Yeah.
Before we go into product launch, how's it been being the only technical person in the business? Because you've built the product from zero to where it is now, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be many people watching this who might be in a similar position, wearing all the hats, doing pretty much everything. So, how have you found it? What have you done to help the situation?
In some ways, for like the techies in us, it's actually a really lovely space to be in because you can just write code all day, every day. The worry about that is that you end up going down into rabbit holes and you start over engineering, and you start kind of, oh, this is going to take us like 6 weeks to build this. And in reality, you shouldn't be building any feature for more than like a day or two. Get it out there, see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, kill it. What's been great for me there is having Ross, who's running 100 miles an hour in terms of we need to onboard customers, and that list keeps building. So you just need to ship product. There's a point coming very quickly where we're going to need to start to recruit staff, and I think we'll go outside of tech first before we come back and hire somebody into the tech team, just because it's about customer experience and it's about retaining those customers we already have. So we need to focus on that. But yeah, I love it. I'm also absolutely amazed at how different my work stream is today with the use of AI to how it was even like 12, certainly 24 months ago. And I don't think we would have built as much product as quickly as we have. And so that just plays into my mind an awful lot about how the industry is changing.
Well, that's a big statement, that you wouldn't have built the product as fast or as good as it was, good fast as without AI. So what tools have you been using and how have you set those up to help your workflows?
Yeah, so and I feel like this is the bit where you cause a little bit of a splinter within of the listeners, right? So I'm OpenAI, ChatGPT. I know a lot of other techies are using Anthropic and Claude and stuff. But very much like that's the LLM. Played a little bit with Cursor, which is kind of big in the industry at the moment and is a Visual Studio clone. Kind of like it, kind of don't in terms of the workflows, just a little, there's bits that are a bit weird. But it's just allowed me, and especially around like the native app. So we've built that all within a React Native. I'd not done an awful lot of React Native until about 12 months ago. And I've got up to speed with that really, really quickly. And that's largely been through ChatGPT. We've probably written some horrific bits of code within of the code base, but it works. So,
Yeah. Do you think you could utilize AI with AI agents workflows to take the work of like the first full-time employee?
Yeah. So like a problem we've got at the moment that I'm literally thinking about, we use a bit of software called Sentry, which is a pretty well-known product out there to capture bugs in production and crashes. And it's just not a natural part of my workflow to go and check Sentry, pull those bugs in, start thinking about them. In a proper dev team, you'd have, whether that's your customer success function or it's your third line support or whoever who would look through those, prioritize those bugs and hand them on to the dev. When there's just one person, you have to do all of that. And I'm quite excited about the idea of having like some agentic AI that can pull those in, prioritize them, and probably even sort of create bug fixes and push them to the repository as pull requests. There's nothing in the loop today that would stop that happening. It's just a case of gluing everything together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I don't like the phrase that's thrown out there, right? AI's taking jobs and that sort of stuff. It's not going to be the case, right? But what you're saying there is AI is taking a lot of tasks from you and potentially some other roles. So with the job market being quite tough at the minute, if you had to give any advice or when you were to hire into the team, like what does a software engineer have to be doing? How can they stand out to make sure that they're employable and going to add value to a startup?
I think, it's a really, really good question. So one of the reasons I've always enjoyed being part of smaller teams is you get to have a big impact on the business. And the business has got problems, whether that's scaling, whether that's, selling the product, whether that's, it'd be really cool if we could build this feature, but we don't necessarily think or know how to think about it from a technical perspective to solve it. And where I think I and the teams that I've worked with have always added value is that juncture between the tech and the business. I don't think those people disappear anytime soon, but they probably write less code. So you just become more useful to the business and you start iterating more quickly. There's then like another kind of developer so a friend of mine is part of a very fast growing startup who build container solutions to run on top of GPUs. So this is like niche, but a massively growing market. And I don't think you're going to start to build really good technology at that low level with LLMs anytime soon, because you've really got to get into the weeds and you've got to have proper subject matter experts and that kind of thing. And also your customer is a very technical customer. So you need to be, again, working between sort of the two worlds. It's how do we take those first year students today out of university? So what will that be, 2028, right, when they graduate? How do we bring them into the workforce? Because the kind of jobs that I was doing when I entered the workforce, I don't see that existing for much longer. And so there's probably a case that the universities need to change the curriculum slightly, and we need to onboard people differently. But I think it'll happen. It's a really good question around whether or not we've reached peak developers. I don't know.
It's changing at such a fast rate at the minute that it's hard to know where it's going.
Yeah, but then that's the nature of humanity, right?
Yeah, for sure.
things change.
And you mentioned that it's going to be really important for, as they write less code, play a more pivotal role in like being closer to the business. So what I always say to people looking to work in a startup, the communication skills and being able to talk about how you do something technically to non-technical people is really, really important. By the sounds of it, you think that's going to be amplified over the next few
I'd say
years.
that's one of the key sort of skills that I'm looking for. I'm probably like the last person I recruited, and she was absolutely brilliant, tried at all the other things. But back at Amplify, we had this massive problem with Elasticsearch. And it was because I had set it up in a bad way and hadn't read the documents or really understood sharding within Elasticsearch. Is it sharding, or I'm pretty sure they call it sharding. And we interviewed this girl, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I totally understand this." She basically explained to us how to fix the problem in the interview, and I was like, "Hired." You're like, done. You're in.
Easy as that. Yeah.
That was like deep technical kind of thing. But yeah, I think increasingly what's important is the ability to communicate, the ability to think about. And it's back to the old Xerox PARC human-computer interaction. It's no different, right? We've got to make stuff that people enjoy using, that delights customers and solves business problems.
Going back to when you first met Ross, you mentioned that I introduced you.
Yeah.
From my perspective, outside in, it snowballed pretty quickly and caught fire, if you like.
Yeah.
When you met in October to product launch was how long?
12 weeks.
Seems very quick to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk me through the process. How quickly did you get in, and how were you able to work at such speeds?
I'm a huge believer that you have to make commitments to your future self. And 12 weeks is like the window. So you can do anything 3 months away. So if you think about Kieran in 3 months, it's going to be an absolutely so much better version of Kieran today. In reality, 12 weeks is not very long at all. So we met whenever it was, 1 week. I sent Ross away to go and build a waiting list. And he came back like the following week. I thought I'll never hear from this guy again, right? And he came back a week later and he said, "Oh, here's my waiting list of 50 people." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well done." He said, "Also, I've charged them to be on the waiting list. I don't know if you wanted me to do that." So I was like chuckling, this is brilliant. This guy can sell. So that's what caused the snowball to start. It's like, okay, this person's sensible.
He's all in, so I'm all in.
Yeah, so, there's an excuse to that, right? And I said to him, "I'll give you 12 weeks of my sort of time-ish in order to build some sort of MVP for Open Moove." And we didn't really know what that was going to look like at that point in time. And then I very quickly contacted a good friend of mine called Geraint, who works over at Brew and Dolphin, and said to Geraint, "We're going to try and launch this thing in like 12 weeks. Can we borrow your office, please, to do the launch?" And Geraint's a great champion of sort of the Welsh startup and tech ecosystem. And he's like, "Yeah, for sure, let's do it." And I think he was a little bit like, "Oh, who knows what Cai's going to turn up with for this." But yeah, we built it. It was really scruffy kind of launch product. The launch itself was lovely. And that was a sort of putting a flag in the ground and saying, like, let's do something around this. It's then been a case of sort of building those conversations with the estate agents, with the conveyancers. But you've got something to show them, and you've got a product you can start to onboard customers onto at that point. And it's grown from there. But I think you've got to just go fast with those early steps. And so much of like the energy and having a clean slate will allow you to go quickly and do a lot more. Whereas once you're 5 years in, 12 weeks is, you're not going to get an awful lot done in 12 weeks.
Yeah, it seemed like you and Ross met at the right time. You were doing your Woodstreet Research. He was doing Isla Alexander, and it just caught fire at the right time.
Yeah, it's great.
Tell me about the couple of days before launch and the couple of days after launch. I'm always interested because it's an exciting time, right? But it's also dependent on scale. It can be nerve-wracking and extremely, you can be firefighting. So, how was the launch for you, and how's it been since post-launch?
A couple of days before launch were horrible. They were horrible. But so it was the 12th of December from memory. So we were in that run up to Christmas, and through my other work, Christmas, everyone's doing like little lunches and dinners, and let's go and have some drinks after work to sort of celebrate the year. And so I was being dragged, not dragged, that's the wrong word, but I was going to do all of that sort of stuff.
Willingly led. Yeah.
Willingly led, that's the line. To go and do all of those things, which, brilliant. But at the same time, I was trying to finish off this product. And so it was all a little bit hectic. We got to the launch, we did that, and it just felt like a kind of, sigh to the end of the year. A couple of days after the launch, I have no idea. I don't think I did anything at all, to be honest. Just sat in a dark room quietly. And it, Christmas was there then pretty much. So if anybody tries to do a sort of 0 to 1 in 12 weeks, highly recommend not doing Christmas as your launch date. That's a really bad idea. I'm still amazed that 60 people turned up on the 12th of December. They didn't have somewhere better to be, some Christmas party, which is, a huge vote of confidence and much appreciated.
I think the free alcohol helped as well, maybe. Yeah.
It does work.
Yes. Yeah.
And the canapes and the nice office and everything else. And I think some people come along as well, just in the vague hope that maybe something goes terribly wrong. Which, touch wood, it didn't. Yeah. So do it in 12 weeks, but maybe like start in spring and have a launch date in summer or something nice like that.
Yeah. Hindsight's wonderful, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was speaking to Ross, from the non-technical perspective, it's very easy to see that, his ambition, and he has an idea of where he wants the business to go in 12, 24, 3 years time. You can do that from a sales perspective, right? Because you can plan ahead. But from a technology point of view, how far ahead are you planning at the minute? And like, what does the roadmap look like? How in detail do you go?
It's a really good question. So we had a meeting this morning with someone who has a marketplace involved in the home moving process. So, when you move home, someone told me you spend about £3,600 on average on other things other than the home move. So this could be removals, this could be insurance, this could be, all that, light bulbs, that sort of stuff. And we're keen in the long term to get involved in trying to smooth that and make it and sequence it particularly. And I think that's the real issue, is that you don't quite know when paperwork is going to get filed or when you're going to hit certain milestones. So you don't know when to book the removals and those sort of things. So we met with somebody this morning and we were talking about bringing that into the platform, and it's not a business consideration for us right now. That's a little bit further down the line, but from a platform perspective, we're in a position where we've built that part of the platform. So now we've just got to build these features and functions on top, which is great, and a nice way to be. So I'm probably not thinking much more than a couple of weeks out currently. But it's nice to have these things that are a little bit further away and think, actually, that won't be too much of an issue to glue in and stick in. We're also being we're in a fortunate position in that with revenue, we can ramp that up calmly. So we can bring a couple of customers in, interview them, speak to them, get what's working, get what's not working, iterate the product without having to sort of just go chasing thousands of customers and having like loads of people shouting at us random ideas and trying to prioritize them and that sort of thing.
That was going to be my next question, actually. How important at this stage is it to go out and get customer feedback on what is working and what isn't working?
Yeah.
And by the sounds of it, are you actively asking these customers to come in or online interview rather than wait for their feedback? So you're actually going out and requesting it?
Yeah, so the original plan was let's just get estate agents based in South Wales because they'll probably have clients based in South Wales, and then we can go and see them and speak to them. That's gone a little bit out of the water. Just as various people were like, "Oh, can I get on?" And we're like, "Yeah, but you're in Milton Keynes. Yeah, but can I get on? Like, I'll put some customers." All right, fine. Grateful for it, but no, very much like let's talk to people constantly and ask them. And people are great. Like if you say, I just want to ask you how you found this, people will give you time and they'll give you really honest feedback. And it's important in terms of understanding where the friction is. We obviously like build analytics into the platform, and we can look at it in a very cold, kind of grid-like way, but it doesn't tell you what actually happened there. And it's, why did you get that far in the process and then stopped? Oh, I had to go and pick the kids up from school, and then I had to cook dinner and I forgot, and then it was the next day and I came back to it. Cool, that's fine. Like, that's not a problem for us. That's not a problem for you. Whereas that if it's, oh, but I tried to do that and it just crashed. It's like, oh, okay, that's something we need to get on straight away.
Okay, that's interesting. Sounds like it's gone relatively well. The first 6 months, there's no major hiccups. But I'm curious, in the next, for the remainder of this calendar year, 2025, what do you envision being one of the biggest challenges from a technology perspective?
From a tech perspective, the bit that sort of plays into my mind is integrating with other platforms. So one of the things that we want to do, and we've said, is for conveyancers, for example, they're busy people. We know that 45% of their life is spent on the phone, which is not good for them and is not conducive to good conveyancing. And part of what Open Moove is promising them is that we can take away that need for people to be chasing you and for you to be updating multiple parties. That all happens through the Open Moove platform. To get that to really work nicely, we've got to have this really sweet integration with their CRM. And likewise the other way around. And so that there is about Open Moove starting to work with other tech providers. And it's not that, I think broadly everyone wants to make the process better, but there's always like a little bit of a fun game in terms of integrating bits and getting that working.
Yeah, I've just on that, I've spoken to Ross quite a lot. I see his engagement on socials about speaking to end users and trying to solve this problem, right? Yeah. And one of the things that keeps coming up is tech isn't the answer in construction anyway, at construction, property and estate agency world. So how do you answer that question? To everyone that says tech isn't the answer.
I wholly agree. Okay. So I think prop tech, we were talking about investors earlier. Prop tech's a really bad asset class from an investment perspective. There's been a lot of money gone in over the last couple of years. And there's no massive runaway success stories. There's some great tech out there for estate agents, conveyancers, etc. But very often people are trying to solve the problem with technology, whereas actually the problem is people. In terms of getting them to work together.
It always is.
Yeah. It always is, right? It's human relations, and and so that's why it's important for us to be talking to every stakeholder and understanding, is this bit of technology we've just put in to your workflow actually delivering for you, or is it just another bit of technology? And solicitors are like the most unreceptive in some ways to tech, because I think they've been promised a lot of silver bullets over the last sort of decade, and actually margins have gone down, workload has gone up, and it's not improving the process for them or making conveyancing any more interesting. And so, we're very, very much sort of focused on, let's take the bits of your job that you don't like, or not that you don't like, but that, and not the sort of the differentiator. Let's automate as much of that as we can. Let's get rid of that process, and then let's give you back the time to do the bit which is interesting and exciting and fun.
That sounds like a good sell, but I know through experience it's a big mindset shift, isn't it? To get people to buy into, free up some time from the B and C tasks to focus on the A tasks, which is whatever it is for a conveyancer. And with the industry having so many potential problem solvers previously that haven't worked out, it's just a big mindset shift as well, which I know Ross is trying to consistently solve.
Yeah, like definitely to work on. And you have to be working with conveyancers that want to change as well, that want to look to that future. Government are making huge noises in this direction. So there's an ambition to digitize all of the sort of the land registry stuff. And something that came up the other day was like microfiche. You ever heard of this?
No, I don't think so. What is that?
I see you're too young.
Yeah, what's that?
It's like you basically have data on a little tiny negative. Then you put the negative into this big screen, and then you can zoom in and drive around it. And so much of records of property transactions are stored on these things. So they're not accessible. They're just literally someone said, we keep them in the car park.
Secure.
Yeah, exactly. But all of that needs to be digitized. And there's a role there for AI to play in terms of pulling out and tagging the data and all this. Once that happens, that will start to speed up transactions, and it'll also reduce the amount of time that conveyancing takes.
That's great for you and Ross that the government are leaning into this way direction as well.
Yeah, we are a nice junction actually, in that I think the Gov are currently very focused on how do we make this process less painful for everybody involved, because you go to other parts of the world and it's not painful. It's a relatively straightforward experience. The UK is just built on 1,000 years of property transactions and all of this that just makes it really complicated.
And as Ross said, it's actually got worse over the years, the home moving process,
which is
just not what we want to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's over the next 12 months? Open Move's going to take up a lot of your time, I'm sure. And what else does Cai Gwinnutt want to do apart from sailing? Apart from ramen kits.
Matsudai ramen.
Yeah.
We should just do a shout out. That's who you should have as a sponsor. We could just sit here
please,
eating
ramen. Please.
I might tee myself up to do a tea stained egg. Bits of sailing, hopefully. Off to to Morocco on a little adventure. Someone just pointed out to me that I'll literally arrive as Eid starts. So I expect to come back a few kilos heavier from that experience. Yeah. I'm not very good at sort of planning my year out in terms of downtime, which is maybe something I should get better at.
It's hard when you're so occupied with a startup, right? It's taking a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about, we need to do some sort of staff, which is Ross and Cai at the moment.
Away days. Swansea.
Cyprus was mentioned.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with that.
Do you think Open Moove will be the main, your main time investment for the rest of the year? Do you see yourself diversifying? What about Woodstreet Research? I
think Woodstreet's going to... So we've got a couple of projects ongoing there currently that are sort of just wrapping up and starting to backfill those projects with actual teams, like tech teams within other companies now. So that's good. And then, I think Open Moove takes over for the foreseeable, which will be good fun.
Good. I think I'd like to end the podcast on something that I'm interested in. I'm sure a lot of people watching will be as well. The investment landscape.
Yeah.
Where are we at right now from who you speak to and what you know compared to last year? Are we improving? Are we at the same place? And what do you see changing over the next 12 months from an investment for startups?
I think one of my favorite sayings is you'll do far less in 12 months than you hoped, but you'll achieve far more in 5 years than you ever dreamt. And I think you have to think about timeframes like that. So if I think about 2018, I guess it was 2017, when Amplify was out raising, and I think about the landscape today, it's so much better.
Today?
It was, yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a sale. Founders are much better educated. The networks are more open, more transparent. It's less of a kind of skullduggery kind of like thing than it was, which is brilliant because that's what's needed. I think today we're in a relatively sort of okay space. If the company has founders who've got good experience and there's revenue in the company, it's not too difficult to go raise. I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not easy, but it's achievable. There's a long way to go if our ambition is to get to like a second tier US market. It's not, San Francisco's its own little thing, but if you want to sort of build something that looks a bit like New York or like somewhere like that, Austin, then there's a long way to go in the UK as a whole, let alone South Wales. Some good sort of SEIS funds out there that write checks relatively early, get the money out the door. I think one of the big struggles around some of those is that you need to bring not just money to the table, but also experience and the address books of those high net worth individuals. And there's a whole chunk of work to be done around that. It's improving all the time. Government have extended SEIS, and I don't know how long that's around for, but that's not going anywhere a minute. We've filled a lot of the gaps around the Horizon funding and the pulling out of the European Union. Innovate's doing its thing. It'd be nice to see smart grants have a little bit of a overhaul in terms of the amount of paperwork that has to be done, and some maybe smaller pots of cash directed in sort of directions. I'm optimistic. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not, but it can be done.
Yeah, I would agree that the startups that we speak to, the ones that are making revenue, the ones that are in six figures, for example, they found it quite straightforward to approach VCs. And the one in name, which I mentioned off camera, has been speaking to 3 different VCs and 3 different offers. Whereas, like you said, if you're pre-revenue, you haven't got no founder experience previously, it's that's when it becomes difficult.
Yeah, that's the hardest bit, and the sort of the playbook of your margin is my opportunity. So I don't need to be profitable this year, next year, or the year after, and I'll use that in order to build my business. That's a really hard business model to pull off, and it is very difficult to raise money if that's what you want to do. And frustratingly, that tends to be the fastest growing companies of the last 20 years of that's been their playbook.
Okay, final bit of advice then. So you've said twice that it's, if you can be someone with experience, a founder with past founder experience, great. If you have got revenue, even better. There's people out there that I know in South Wales, you may as well, first-time founders, haven't got revenue just yet, maybe got an MVP. What advice could you give someone like that?
So if you're building the product, stop building the product today, go and sell it.
Okay.
Like, it's not perfect, and it's probably really embarrassing in terms of like some of the bugs that you've got. Go and sell it. And if you can't get people to buy, I met a company the other day, and I was like, this is a cool problem to be solving, and it looks like you've got a sensible product, but just start selling it. People will forgive you early days. So that would be my one bit of advice. If you are currently within of a company and you've got this idea for a startup, and you want to build something, look for an opportunity for a new job within of a startup. That's always a great way to get some experience of what it looks like, and realizing you have to roll your sleeves up and kind of do 10 different jobs at the same time. But also, again, you've got time in the evenings to build out your MVP or whatever that looks like, but don't be doing that for 12 months. Like, you've got to launch, you've got to put your name out there. And if you can't, if you're a tactical founder and it's confidence, it's I don't know how to sell, I don't know how to open those conversations, start going to, and there's loads of really good like meetup groups. I'm sure we could put some in the show notes or something.
For sure.
But go to those things, do the networking, meet people, talk about the problem you're trying to solve. And very quickly, you'll mention to me or you'll mention to you, I'm building this because I care about this problem. We'll just be like, oh, you should speak to this person because, that's the whole point
That's
of
how it happens.
networking,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's how it happens. And you might be lucky in that you meet a nutter like Ross, who you're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to run with you for a bit because you're like, you're mad.
I know exactly what you mean, though. Some people who are founders of startups, they'll do everything apart from sell the product. They'll start the business, VAT set up, get the product ready, new features, anything but going to speak to people. And I get it. Sometimes it's tough for people, but you've just got to get out there, right? Yeah.
You can take, Taxman probably tell you different, but you can definitely start taking some sort of money into a company without registering the company.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Get some commitments and then go and see your accountant and they'll sort it out. But this is like, most startup ideas die in people's heads. And then the next cohort die somewhere on GitHub where they just never get launched. And it's a small fraction of that they're actually making out to being sold. And you need to be in that small fraction of being sold. And the only way to get into that small fraction is to actually go and sell it. So get there as quickly as you can. And, we built and launched Open Moove in 12 weeks. It's not the final product. It's not like, I wouldn't say I'm proud of it, but it's not something I'd hang up on the wall and be like, ta-da! Yeah. But get there as quickly as you can.
Good. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast today, Cai. I've really enjoyed the chat.
Cheers, Kieran.
Thanks,
man.
Good. Thanks. That was episode 4 of the Calculated Risk podcast with Cai Gwinnutt. We really hope you enjoyed listening to his story so far. He's the founder of Woodstreet Research and the co-founder of Open Moove that are solving the home moving process here in the UK. They've got some big plans for the Open Moove over the next 12 months, so please go follow Cai, Ross and Open Moove on socials. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode where we'll be speaking to Marco Oliver, the founder of Configure. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.